I feel very threatened when I come to the house of God here, because as I was walking around, I noticed a few posters, and I got a bit, afraid, and I'm was just looking at. Wanted to visit a bit the gardens and enjoy the place before I come and worship. And suddenly I come across some warnings, aspect of gardens are dangerous. You enter here at your own risk. Please take extra care. And as I came here, I'm just reading right here the first words which welcome me. We are calling on members and guests to be mindful of risks. That's what I read here. You may also read that. In other words, when you come to the house of God, you better be careful. You better, pay attention to where you put your feet, because it's a very risky place. And actually, you are very in tune with the text, which is going to be our text this morning, and it has already been read. So we read it again, and this is in the middle. We are going there, right there in the middle of the book of Ecclesiastes, in the heart. And we know that those who study the book, they know that this is really the center of a big poem. And we have a number of clues, literary clues, which clearly suggest this is really the heart of the book. And there, as we get into the heart of the book, right there in the middle of vanity. You know what I'm talking when I say vanity? You just look at your mirror and you will understand right away what I am talking about. All right. And the beginning, the whole first section of the book of Ecclesiastes, you have many words about vanity. Actually, you have 17 times the word vanity is used. And then in the second part of the book of Ecclesiastes, you have again 17 times the term vanity. And in the middle, where we are, no word about vanity. The word vanity is not used. This is the center, and this center begins with that particular word, walk prudently when you go to the house of God. It's precisely what is being said. So Ecclesiastes is everywhere here on campus. It tells us, in other words, if I translate literally the text, it tells us it's precisely watch your feet. It's exactly what is being said, as if the one who wrote the warnings had the book of Ecclesiastes in mind. Walk prudently for one particular reason, for one particular purpose. There is a reason for that. When you come to the house of God, what's going to happen? And the text pursues and says, draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools. The reason why we should be careful, should pay attention to our feet when we come to the house of God, is given right here in the middle of the book of Ecclesiastes, which is, by the way, addressed to young people. He's a young man like me who is speaking to young people like you. All right, and he's saying to you, as Solomon said the other day to his fellow young people, watch out when you come to the house of God. He knew what he was talking about because Solomon is the one who built the temple, this beautiful temple. And here he said to young people, well, before you jump there, be careful. Watch your feet. Why? And this is the purpose, that's the reason why we come to the house of God, to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools. Otherwise, we do something wrong if we don't do that. To hear rather than to give. This is a very surprising statement. To hear, to receive, rather than to give. This is what it means. What he's saying to us right there is that receiving is more important than giving, which goes the other way around than when we are, boxing our fellow friends. Receiving is more valuable than giving. This is what we could say when we box our friend, right? And so he's saying something which is very surprising, because we are educated in giving, and we think that giving is very important. Giving is the value. And Solomon says, no, receiving is more important than giving. There was a competition many, many years ago. Actually, it took place in the 17th century at Amsterdam, not very far from here. It was a competition of philosophy. There was a topic which was given to those who were going to think and write. And the topic was that was the topic which was given to these philosophers, the Academy of Amsterdam. What is greater, beauty or technique? And they all wrote on that, and finally the one who earned the prize was a man of the name of Miguel de Barrios. He was a Spaniard, and he answered, beauty is more valuable than technique. In other words, if I ask you the question, what is more valuable? This beautiful sunset I watched yesterday, or this Apple computer you have in your hand? Miguel de Barrios will say the beautiful sunset is more valuable than the computer. I'm not so sure about what you will answer. But this is what he answered. And he won the prize. And he explained the reason why it is that way is that beauty is a gift of God, whereas technique is a work of man. Therefore, beauty is more important than technique. In biblical ethics, by the way, this is something which we may be surprised. In biblical ethics, indeed, receiving is more important than giving. And there are a number of reasons for that, which are elaborated throughout the scriptures. And one of them is the fact that the person who gives is the one who is rich. He doesn't need, so he gives. He has everything, therefore he gives. He has a certain way of thinking when he gives. Whereas the one who receives is very humble. He's a poor, he's a beggar. He's just dependent on him. He's called in Hebrew the ani, that is really the poor, the one who depends on the other. And the Bible is telling us that when you have that kind of frame of mind, and you come to the house of God with the idea of receiving, of reasoning, of hearing, rather than giving, rather than speaking, rather than acting, you are on the right place. What the Bible is saying to us, and what Ecclesiastes is suggesting, that contrary to what you may think, if you come to the house of God with the idea of, I have nothing to give, I have everything to receive, you are at the right place. You are in the right direction. And what is happening here in our context, there is something specific, because we are in a particular context, that is the context of the sacrifice, which is the context of the Lord's Supper. And what Ecclesiastes, the language he uses here is really the language of the sacrifice, draw near. In Hebrew, this is the word karov, which is the technical term for sacrifice. So when you come to a sacrifice, he's talking to these people who are making sacrifices at that time. When you come to the house of God and you do a sacrifice, you should come with the idea of receiving rather than the idea of giving. Because if you come with the idea of giving to God, you are doing something completely foolish. And some people were thinking that when they came to the house of God, they came in order to give to God. And they were preparing their sacrifice. They were preparing their gift. They were preparing themselves in order to give to God. And what Ecclesiastes is saying to them, you are fools. What are you going to give to God? Does God need something from you? He doesn't need anything from you. He has everything. On the other hand, when you come to the house of God, you are the one who is in need. You are the one who is supposed to hear. And this is a ridiculous situation that sometimes God's people may be in, and we see a number of people in the scriptures who have this illusion that when they come to the house of God, when they come to God, is to give him something, to offer to him, to give him, to speak our language, the tithe, to give him the Sabbath, to give him myself. And Ecclesiastes is reversing the traditional speech. He's telling them, you are ridiculous, you are really fools. You come to the sacrifice, and you think that you are going to give to God. And remember, the sacrifice, the meaning of the sacrifice. What does the sacrifice mean? Why are you doing this sacrifice? Why did the people of Israel come and offer the sacrifice? What is the meaning of the sacrifice? This is something we remember this morning. We will remember this morning as we will be sharing and the Lord's Supper, and remember the great sacrifice of the Lord himself. You cannot come to the sacrifice and think that we are making a sacrifice to God when this sacrifice is reminding you the sacrifice of God for you. And what we are learning right now in that particular frame of mind is that this particular religion we are talking about, this particular relationship with God we are talking about, in this particular relationship, the fact that God gives to you is more important than what you give to God. And this is precisely what the sacrifice is all about. This is precisely the meaning of the sacrifice, which is really captured and said in essence when you read, this phrase of John, which you all know, God so loved the world that he gave his son. That's what we are celebrating this morning, in a way. When you come to this sacrifice, when you come to the house of God, be careful where you put your feet. Be careful how you speak. Be careful how you sing. Be careful how you think. Why? Because you are in the presence of the one who sacrificed for you. It's interesting that when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, which we are studying together with a few students here, you have the whole first part of the book of Ecclesiastes is about vanity, about the fact we are nothing, about the fact that this life is meaningless, that we will all die, that we are ridiculous, and we are all the more ridiculous when we come and worship the God who is not vanity at all. And suddenly here in that particular section we are studying, we have a shift to from the place of vanity, from the place of the ego, where vanity is, where the heart of vanity is, the ego, yourself, myself, Suddenly we shift in the center of the book of Ecclesiastes to be in presence of the one where there is no vanity. And this is why we as vain people, we as nothing, as people who mean nothing, we are nothing. We are just a vapor, as the word vanity suggests in the original language. And this vapor comes and to worship the Lord who is real, the great Lord, the Elohim, the God. The word God is used in that particular section more than in other places. There is a highest, this is the place in the center of the book of Ecclesiastes where we have the highest concentration of the references to God. We have very few references to God before and after. Suddenly we are confronted to the God of life, to the God of creation, the God who created us, the God who also judges us, the God who knows who we are, who knows also our vanity, the God who sees our thoughts, with whom we cannot cheat, with whom we cannot be vain. Suddenly we are confronted to this God. And what the text is saying now, we are confronted to this God. Be careful. Be careful. Do not speak. Speak less. Do not move. It's interesting that when the prophets were confronted to this God, their response to this God was precisely that way. It was like a physical reflex. Confronted to the God, suddenly they couldn't speak. Suddenly they couldn't move. They got paralyzed. They got mute. Remember Daniel, remember Moses. Suddenly they prostrated. You know, the position of prostration is the position of death. They put their mouth in their dust. They were paralyzed. They couldn't speak. They couldn't move because they were exposed to the great God of life, the God of creation, their God, the God who saw their thoughts, the God who heard their words. And they couldn't use a word anymore. They couldn't even speak. They couldn't even move. This is why Solomon said that. When you come to the house of God, stop speaking, speak less. Stop moving, move less. Because he's there. He's the one in charge. Just to conclude here a moment, on another question about the Sabbath. Why is the Sabbath? There is I will tell that question in the form of a midrash, in the form of a parable. Some angels were intrigued. Why did God give the Sabbath to humans? So they discussed together. Big discussion, a very intelligent discussion. Why did God give the Sabbath? And then they remember the creation story, their own version of the creation story, and they understood. It is because humans were so in action. They were so working hard with God during the 6 days of creation. They were working hard with God. For 6 days, Adam and Eve worked hard with God, and God got so grateful, said, you work so hard. Now I'm going to give you as a reward the Sabbath. You deserve to rest after this hard work. Therefore, I give you the Sabbath. I'm sure this is what you are reading in the scriptures. Am I right? Why did God give the Sabbath to humans? Is it because they worked hard as a reward to them? He gave them the Sabbath to remind them that he worked for them when they were not even there. One of the reasons for the Sabbath, and perhaps the reason for the Sabbath, is to tell us that God works for us, that we are here just to receive and not to give to him. That when we receive from God, it's more important than when we give to him. When we receive from God and we are beggars and we hear from him, we are closer to him than when we speak to him. This is a story which is being told, which is going to be told to you now when you are going to walk around on this campus, and each time you see warning, watch your feet, remember, that's the message of the book of Ecclesiastes. That's a message for right now, for this moment of worship. When we approach the altar and we will wash our feet, to remember that it is more important to hear than to give the sacrifice. It is more important simply because we are not the one who gave the sacrifice. He is the one who gave the sacrifice. And therefore, when we approach the altar, let's remember together that God is the one who is right here. We are in touch with the Lord who sacrificed himself so that you can come to him. And once you remember that, you will watch your feet. And if I may play on the word, you will wash your feet to each other, to remember that you are just nothing, that he is everything. Amen.